Hello, everyone, and welcome back to People Deserve to Live. I'm Sam.
And I'm Shirin. Thank you for joining us today.
Today, we're talking about the current situation in the Middle East, especially the tensions involving Iran, the United States, Israel, and their allies. This is a moment where the whole world is watching because even a regional conflict can affect global security and the lives of ordinary people. We've seen direct actions that have pushed the region closer to a major war than at any point in the last decade.
Exactly. And before we begin, we want to be clear about something. We are trying to look at this from multiple angles, not from one side only. This is a very emotional and political issue, but our goal is to stay balanced and focus on facts, context, and most importantly, the human cost. Because in a media environment that's so polarized, it's easy to get trapped in one narrative. Our aim here is to step back from the talking points and look at the interconnectedness of it all.
Exactly, because when people hear a phrase like Iran and the US with its allies, it sounds simple, but it is not simple at all. This crisis includes direct state tensions, regional alliances, Hezbollah and Lebanon, global shipping routes, nuclear concerns, and humanitarian consequences. So today, we want to break it down in a way that feels human and understandable.
It truly is. You also have other actors like armed groups in Iraq and Yemen who are part of this complex picture, each with their own agenda, but also clearly influenced by the broader tensions. It's a multi-front, multi-layered conflict.
So let's start with where things stand right now. As of April 9th, 2026, there is a reported 2-week ceasefire between the United States and Iran, and diplomacy is expected to continue, with Pakistan involved as a mediator.
Pakistan as a mediator? That's interesting.
It is. Pakistan has a unique position, having relationships with both Iran as a neighbor and the United States as a long-time, if sometimes complicated, strategic partner. They also have close ties with key Gulf states, so they are seen as a channel that can speak to all sides. The United Nations and several European governments have welcomed that pause, but they are also warning that it is fragile, extremely fragile.
And this is where we should mention something important. The temporary ceasefire did bring a certain amount of relief around the world.
Yes, but I would call it cautious relief, not real peace. There was a sense that maybe the region had stepped back from a much larger war, at least for the moment.
It's like everyone took a collective breath, but they're afraid to exhale.
That's a perfect way to put it, because the underlying issues, the core grievances, haven't been resolved. The ceasefire is more like a pause button than a stop button.
You could see that reaction in financial markets too. AP reported that U.S. stocks rose and oil prices pulled back from higher levels because investors were reacting to hopes that the ceasefire might hold. So yes, the pause created a brief feeling that maybe the worst escalation could be avoided.
Right.
But it goes beyond just oil prices. Think about maritime insurance rates for ships passing through the region, or the price of goods that have to be rerouted. The global supply chain felt this tension immediately, and the ceasefire provided a moment of stability for those markets.
But that relief has limits. It is not the kind of relief that comes with stability. It is more like the relief people feel when a dangerous situation pauses, but no one knows for how long. Because while the ceasefire exists on paper, violence and tension around Lebanon and the Strait of Hormuz are still making people question whether this can really last.
And that brings us to one of the biggest problems right now, Lebanon.
Yes, Lebanon is in many ways the critical flashpoint. Reuters reported that EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaya Kallas said the U.S.-Iran truce should be extended to Lebanon because a full-scale war there could trigger another massive refugee crisis and destabilize the entire eastern Mediterranean. If Lebanon is left out, the wider ceasefire may not survive.
In other words, if Washington and Tehran pause direct confrontation, but Israeli attacks in Lebanon continue and Hezbollah remains in active conflict, then the region is still highly unstable.
Exactly. And AP is reporting that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has now authorized direct talks with Lebanon, which some see as a possible opening for broader de-escalation.
A possible opening.
Yes, but it's an opening filled with skepticism. These talks are happening after devastating strikes and amid a lot of distrust. For many in Lebanon, it feels like negotiating while their house is still on fire. So even diplomatic movement is happening in the shadow of real violence.
Let's talk about that violence directly, because this is where the human reality becomes impossible to ignore.
AP reported that recent Israeli strikes in Beirut and other parts of Lebanon killed hundreds of people and wounded more than 1,000. Reuters also reported criticism from European officials over the scale of those attacks. In addition, over 1 million people have reportedly been displaced in Lebanon. These are not small numbers. These are lives, neighborhoods, families, and futures being shattered.
And these people are being displaced within a country that was already facing a severe economic collapse, with schools becoming shelters and hospitals running out of fuel. And this is exactly why a podcast like People Deserve to Live matters. Because once discussions become too geopolitical, people start disappearing behind the map. We hear about borders, alliances, leverage, deterrence, retaliation. But the people living under bombs, losing homes, trying to find medicine, or waiting for news about relatives, those people can get pushed to the background.
Yes, and they should not be in the background. They should be the center.
Now, if we step back, this conflict is also about different narratives. The U.S. frames its role around deterrence and security. Iran frames itself as resisting outside pressure and defending sovereignty. Israel emphasizes the threat from Iran and Iran-backed groups like Hezbollah. European governments are focusing more openly on diplomacy, civilian protection, and preventing wider regional collapse. Absolutely. Another major part of this crisis is the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, this is one of the world's most important shipping routes for oil and gas. About 1/5 of the world's daily oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway.
1/5? That's an incredible bottleneck.
It is, and Reuters and AP both report that the current conflict has kept major attention on Hormuz, affected oil prices, and raised fears about freedom of navigation. The UK is now publicly saying the strait must remain toll-free, and European governments are pressing for open maritime access as part of any broader deal.
And this isn't a new concern. There have been tensions in the strait for decades, with incidents involving tankers, naval patrols, and drones. But now, with direct state-on-state conflict, the risk feels much more acute.
And this matters because the consequences spread globally. If energy shipping through Hormuz is threatened, then prices rise and businesses react. The IMF has also reported that the war is expected to slow global economic growth. Ordinary people in many countries will feel the impact through inflation and higher living costs. It does. The IMF projections are quite clear. They've suggested global growth could be cut by as much as a full percentage point if the conflict were to escalate into a full-blown regional war. That's a massive impact, potentially tipping some economies into recession.
And which regions are most vulnerable to that kind of shock?
Primarily Europe and parts of Asia that are heavily dependent on imported energy. But really, no one is immune. Higher energy costs feed into the price of everything, from manufacturing to food. Developing nations, which are already struggling with debt and food insecurity, would be hit the hardest.
And then there is a humanitarian angle beyond the immediate battlefield. AP reported that aid groups are warning the conflict is making it harder for food and medicine to reach millions.
That is a very important point, because war does not only kill directly, it also disrupts the systems people rely on to stay alive.
Right. A conflict can block access to hospitals, slow aid delivery, damage infrastructure, and deepen poverty.
Or think about education. When schools are bombed or used as shelters, a whole generation can lose their chance at an education. The long-term impact of that is devastating for a country's recovery.
So, when governments talk about military goals, we also have to ask what is happening to the people who need insulin, antibiotics, fuel, clean water, and safe roads.
And that is why people around the world felt some relief when the ceasefire was announced. Not because anyone thought all the problems were solved, but because people were afraid of something even worse. They were afraid of a wider regional war with even greater humanitarian consequences.
What does that worst scenario even look like?
It's a chilling thought. It could mean direct, sustained missile exchanges between nations, not just proxies. It could mean the complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It could mean the total collapse of the state in Lebanon, leading to chaos. And it could drag in more and more countries, either by choice or by necessity.
Let's also talk about the nuclear question, because whenever Iran is at the center of a major crisis, that issue comes back immediately.
It's impossible to ignore. After the U.S. withdrew from the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran began to increase its nuclear activities. We're now in a situation where its program is more advanced than ever. The International Atomic Energy Agency, or IAEA, has said that diplomacy and verification remain essential, but they've also warned that attacks on nuclear sites create serious risks, and their verification work has been disrupted. When monitoring becomes weaker, mistrust becomes stronger, and the deeper sources of conflict remain unresolved.
And war spreads through fear too. It spreads through interrupted phone calls, empty airports, delayed visas, blocked medicine, rising food prices, and the constant feeling that something worse may happen tomorrow.
So where does this leave us?
It leaves us in a moment of contradiction. There is a ceasefire, but also deep instability. There is diplomacy, but also bombing. There is global relief, but only partial relief. There is hope, but it is mixed with distrust. That is why this moment feels so uncertain.
And that is also why it would be wrong to talk as if the crisis is over. It is not over. At best, there is an opening, a narrow one.
Yes, and the next steps matter a lot. People should be watching whether the talks move forward, whether Lebanon gets included in a wider ceasefire structure, whether shipping through Hormuz remains open, and whether humanitarian conditions improve or worsen.
And also, a key indicator will be the language used by leaders. Are they talking about off-ramps and de-escalation, or are they doubling down on threats and red lines? That rhetoric matters, because it can either open space for diplomacy or close it.
Those are some of the clearest signs of whether the region is moving toward stability or back toward escalation.
Before we close, I want to bring it back to the name of this show. People deserve to live.
Yes, because before ideology, before strategy, before alliances, there are people. People who want to live without airstrikes, without displacement, without shortages, without losing family members to decisions made far above them.
People who want the simple dignity of planning a future, of knowing that the school their child goes to will still be there next week, of being able to care for their elderly parents without fearing a power cut at the hospital.
And no matter where someone stands politically, that should be a principle large enough to hold on to.
The temporary ceasefire gave the world a brief moment to breathe, but breathing is not the same as healing. Relief is not the same as peace. And unless the pause grows into something broader, more inclusive, and more humane, then this will only be remembered as a break between rounds of suffering.
Peace will require restraint, diplomacy, accountability, and above all, the recognition that civilians are not side notes in this story.
They are the story. Every number in a casualty report was a person. Every displaced family has a name. Their lives are not collateral damage. They are the entire point.
Thank you for listening to People Deserve to Live. I'm Sam.
And I'm Shirin.
Please take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next episode. Please like, share, and subscribe.